That's not Earth firepower. That's something worse. Admiral Rith Dakar's words were low, clipped, directed at no one in particular, and yet loud enough to halt every motion in the control bay. His eyes, dark and unblinking, stayed locked on the heads-up display. 30 alien silhouettes, descending through Earth's orbital net like curved blades, slicing through clouds. Inside the Greenland command bunker, a subterranean complex cooled by glacial tunnels, the lighting dimmed to amber combat protocol. Walls pulsed with data feeds. Operators leaned into consoles, fingers flying across surfaces that shimmered with battle map overlays. A synthetic scent, coolant and burnt insulation from an overloaded relay, cut through the recycled air. The room had all the heat of war and none of its noise. Commander Torin Vask didn't move from his position on the elevated central platform. 42 years old, with coarse crowback hair and a jaw that hadn't unknotted in a decade, he stood with the posture of a man carved from impact-tested alloy. His uniform jacket remained unzipped, collar loose, a faint smear of graphite oil on the sleeve from personally fixing the corridor comm relay earlier that morning. He preferred hands-on control. Machines lied less than men. A thunderous ripple shook the ceiling above. Not from below, never from below in a command vault this deep. It was air displacement. External pressure reports confirmed it. Atmospheric breach over the South Pacific. The Zynar fleet had broken formation. They were inside Earth's upper troposphere. Confirm altitude at entry, Torin ordered, his voice blunt, unyielding. 72,000 feet, multiple dive angles. Forward ships are arming kinetic payloads, replied Senior Tech Ralvik, hunched over targeting data with sweat beating down his temple. Torin stepped down from the platform, the crunch of his boots audible against the grated deck. No angle corrections? None. They're not trying to hide, sir. Of course they weren't. The Zynar didn't negotiate. They conquered, absorbed, and discarded. Their angular warships, dull charcoal frames with scarlet command spines, had torn through 3 systems last year. The Ganymede Accord hadn't slowed them. Torin had watched it happen. 1 fleet per planet, 1 message sent before annihilation. And now they were here. Dakar leaned closer to the tactical table, knuckles white against the surface. We've got 12 hours before they reach optimal strike orbit. Their configuration's locked. Classic Zynar assault grid. Dense forward shield array, payload banks, rear mount, overlapping energy cycling across the mid-deck. All designed for planetfall. Torin nodded slowly. Too dense. Dakar turned. Come again? Torin walked over to a side console and tapped into the live feed from the North Pacific observation satellites. The feed jittered, then settled. 30 vessels, tight as a spearhead, not a formation. They were a weapon. He rewound 3 seconds, analyzing vector overlays and maneuvering patterns. They're optimized for hitting surface targets, he said, but they've narrowed their spacing to maximize atmospheric kinetic descent. If we had high-yield orbital disruptors, we could punch through. He cut himself off. They didn't. Not anymore. Dakar raised an eyebrow. What do we have? Torin didn't answer. Instead, he opened a Level 7 protocol lock. A small keycard from his breast pocket slid into the input. An encrypted sequence flowed down the display. Project Prometheus came online. A silent acknowledgement pinged back. Carrier Ravenhold, status. Stealth mode. Payloads armed, awaiting designation. Dakar's expression changed. I thought that was still in field trials, he said. Torin didn't blink. I lied. Prometheus was Earth's contingency against exactly this scenario. Drones, unlike anything Earth had fielded before. Each one housing an antimatter payload, stabilized by magnetic compression, precise enough to breach Zynar shielding during microcycle resets. They were silent, untrackable. The warheads, if ruptured improperly, could strip the atmosphere from 10 kilometers of sky. That's why only one man was cleared to activate them. And he had already done it. The low ceiling vibrated. A harsh metal groan echoed from the deep-range seismic monitors. They weren't firing yet, but they were preparing to. Xiner ships didn't test range, they calculated it once, and fired once. "Command," called Ralvik. "Incoming visual." The Xenar signal overtook Earth's comm grid. Static burst across every satellite band before stabilizing into a visual. A creature stood in obsidian armor. One organic eye and one cybernetic lens. Its voice filtered through brutal syntax converters. Earth Command. You are advised to surrender all orbital platforms and energy resources within 12 of your hours. Failure to comply will result in total eradication of terrestrial infrastructure. Comply, and your extinction will be administered painlessly. The broadcast cut. Dakar swore under his breath. 12 hours to hand over the planet. Torin turned back to the display. 12 hours to trap them. Dakar didn't flinch. "You're sure?" "No," Torin replied. "But they're clustered. Too confident. If we make them think we're hesitating, they'll tighten even more." From the lower deck, a junior officer shouted, "Sir, civilian feeds are beginning to show atmospheric burn trails. 10 cities have visual confirmation of the descent." Torin's fist clenched, not from fear, but timing. The tighter the Xenar drew themselves, the higher the risk to his people, and the greater the opportunity to break them. He brought up the interface for Ravenhold, Earth's first stealth carrier, suspended above the Arctic and housing the Prometheus drone grid. No signal left the bunker. No signal needed to. The link was quantum-locked, unjammable, unreachable, and Captain Joran Holt was already in position. Torin stared at the black glass screen, watching the enemy formation tighten, unaware they were drawing a noose around their own necks. Dakar stepped beside him. "Your move." Torin tapped the screen once. A single command line confirmed transmission. Project. Prometheus initiated. Counter-strike locked. Drone wave phase 1, ready. He spoke the words flatly. Let them descend. They'll find more than clouds waiting. Far above, as the Pacific lit with fiery contrails and the world looked up in terror, a silent swarm of drone pods deployed from Ravenhold's belly. Unseen. Unheard. They were not humanity's last line. They were the first response. And they were already moving. Run the feed from 2147. I want to see his hands before I trust him with 30 antimatter warheads. Inside the command dome of Ravenhold, the Arctic-facing Terran stealth carrier, engineer Vex Marrow's voice echoed with the kind of blunt suspicion that only came from long hours and high stakes. His boots scuffed across the reinforced floor as he leaned into the primary viewing table. He hadn't slept in 18 hours, and he didn't plan to. The footage played archival, raw. 6 men in magnetic suits scrambling through the broken ribs of an asteroid rig while fire licked through oxygen lines. Commander Torin Vask was pinned under a collapsed frame, his left leg twisted beneath shattered latticework, blood streaking upward in microgravity. A single technician moved toward him, not away, fighting through the spinning debris. That technician, now Captain Joran Holt, cut through the collapsed beam with a thermocord, wedging Vask free as fuel tanks ruptured behind them. The audio picked up Vask yelling, "Leave me!" followed by Holt's voice, louder, steadier, "Not happening, sir." Morrow snorted, muting the clip. Still reckless. Across the control bay, Holt adjusted his black command vest, face unreadable beneath the overhead task lights. He wasn't watching the footage. He didn't need to. Every muscle in his body still remembered the burn of that rescue, the pull of Vask's weight against vacuum drag, the taste of blood and heat inside his helmet filter, the moment the containment seals failed and oxygen had hissed out like an open vein. Now, almost a decade later, he stood in command of Earth's quietest threat. "Reckless gets results," he said, eyes locked on the tactical schematic rotating beside him. "You've seen the calibration sync?" Marrow nodded once. "Drones are slave to staggered signal bursts, quantum tetherings holding steady, but Zynar jammers are already probing. They'll kill 20% of our uplink. 15 tops, Holt replied. The rest just have to land. Beneath the floor, in a sealed bay carved into Ravenhold's undercarriage, 200 Prometheus drones waited inside launch hatches. Each one sleek, burned black, layered with kinetic shielding that shimmered faintly under diagnostic strobes. Inside their cores, antimatter payloads compressed within magnetic fields so dense they could fold an apartment block into vapor. One misfire, and the upper atmosphere would burn. Holt tapped through his launch cycle window. How many containment fields still show flux instability? 7, Moreau muttered. 3 on the verge of fault. I've rerouted containment load to the secondary cores, but you get 1 cycle. Not well, said Reed. Pause, enough. The deck trembled, but Holt felt it in his knees. The Zynar warships had broken the upper edge of the atmosphere. Ground control would be scrambling now to mask civilian feeds, but someone would get through. Someone always did. Cities would already be posting streaks of descending light above their oceans, unaware that inside the clouds, death had arrived. A command ping lit up the comms interface, incoming from Greenland. Holt keyed it open without ceremony. Vask's face appeared on the flat display, lines drawn deeper since they'd last spoken in person. His tone was stripped of all preamble. Are the drones live? Yes. Containment levels? Stabilized, adjusted for jammer loss. Launch windows calculated to match the cycle resets. If they tighten formation, it works better. Vask exhaled, more calculation than fatigue. They'll tighten. They think we're afraid. I know. They didn't exchange more than that. They never needed to. The feed cut. Holt turned to Morrow. Target overlays for Strike Group Alpha. Show me blast cones if we hit their flagship core. Morrow swept his fingers through the control grid, and a map unfolded across the central projection table. It displayed the Zynar assault formation. Dense, overlapping trajectories, each ship sharing shield frequencies for energy efficiency. At its center, the command carrier, identifiable by its deeper gravitational imprint and the heavy saturation of thermal signatures along its mid-deck spine. Holt leaned closer. Payload Group Alpha. Designate core impact belly curve during their shield dip. Morrow narrowed his eyes. You're aiming at the underside? They shift shields forward during acceleration bursts. That belly is exposed mid-cycle for 1.3 seconds. Morrow hesitated. And if we miss, we won't. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't arrogance. It was simply the truth Jorn Holt carried like oxygen. He didn't trust algorithms to win wars. He trusted timing. He trusted structure. And above all, he trusted men, like Torn Vask, to see the window others missed. Start compression staging, Holt ordered. Begin decoupling sequence on pod banks 1 through 5. I want everything locked and loaded before the next pulse shift. He moved to the observation rail above the drone bay, watching as hydraulics hissed and the armored floor plates retracted, revealing rows of armed drones. They sat like coiled predators, each one armed with a warhead engineered not to blast, but to erase. The floor buzzed under his boots as magnetic repulsion coils activated. Holt pressed one palm against the glass, felt the micro-vibration as charge built inside the launch rails. From behind him, Morrow spoke, quieter this time. Your hands, back on that asteroid. Why'd you go back for him? Holt didn't turn. Was worth the risk. Seconds passed. Then, countdown initiated, Morrow announced. Wave 1 will be ready in 60 seconds. Everything's in sync. Holt stared down at the drones. They were already moving. Elevation pistons lifting, stabilization rings locking, indicator lights changing from amber to deep red. He thought of the cities below, the families that would never know how close they came to ending, the satellites now watching a burning sky. And he thought of Torin, one leg crushed, blood soaking through his suit, still ordering Holt to leave him behind. He hadn't then, he wouldn't now. Final launch lock, Mauro said. Joran's voice was calm. Send them out. With a sound like air being torn apart, the first 10 drones vanished into launch tubes. Accelerated by rail stage discharge, wrapped in atmospheric shrouds, invisible to enemy sensors. Project Prometheus had awakened, and it was already underway. The water split like torn fabric. From 30 kilometers above the Pacific, the Zynar warhead dropped clean through the troposphere and struck the old monitoring station at Mach 9. It wasn't designed for stealth. It didn't need to be. The projectile hit with such focused energy that the station's reinforced shell liquefied on impact, vapor columns rising in rings, the pressure rupturing air and water alike. What little remained of the station, 3 linked satellites tethered to a hydrostatic anchor, disintegrated before any auto-response could activate. 400 miles away, a weather drone caught the flash. 10 seconds later, civilian feeds across 3 continents were hijacked by a blur of static, then stabilized into replay footage. Slow motion collapse, debris curling skyward in unnatural shapes, waves punching out in concentric bursts. A title crawled across the feed in 7 languages. Pacific Sensor Array lost. Impact, origin, unknown. Inside Greenland Command, the footage played back on multiple channels. Officers didn't speak. There was no screaming, no alarms. The stillness came from something deeper. Recognition. Commander Torin Vask stood at the central tier, coat now folded over a chair, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His arms bore faded scars, some from the 2147 asteroid breach, others from classified conflicts no one talked about. One hand gripped the rail as he stared at the replay, not for analysis, but for weight. The Zynar hadn't struck a military target. They'd hit a decoy, deliberately and publicly. Admiral Dekar approached with a datapad, face drawn tighter than usual. We tried to scrub it. Civilian satellites beat us. Tokyo, Auckland, Buenos Aires. They're all broadcasting it raw. Let 'em, Torin muttered. This isn't the kind of fear you erase. It's the kind that consolidates. Dekar tapped through a trajectory map. Next window for a follow-up strike is 30 minutes, maybe less. Torin activated the master controls on his station. The interface responded instantly. He keyed into Phase 1, the beginning of the trap. Deploy decoy drones, full spread. Dekar's brow lifted. That confirms we're armed. No, Torin replied. It confirms we're watching. A command relay bounced to orbit, rerouted through encrypted nodes before reaching Ravenhold. Above the Arctic stratosphere, the carrier responded in silence. Its underbelly opened as 30 decoy drones slid into launch rails. These weren't armed. They carried nothing but signal repeaters and distorted EM tags, just enough to simulate a hard target defense grid. Their flight paths mimicked interceptors. Their engine heat signatures read real. The first wave launched with a shudder. Thin atmospheric trails etched brief scars into the sky. From surface telescopes, they looked like defensive mobilization. From above, they were bait. On board Ravenhold, Captain Joran Holt didn't speak. He watched the telemetry align, hands loose at his sides, his breath steady. Behind him, Engineer Vex Morrow kept one eye on field displacement patterns. They're seeing us. Good, Holt replied. Back on Earth, Torin watched the enemy's next move. Zynar formations didn't panic. They recalculated. That's what they were doing now. On the global tactical screen, the Zynar cluster changed shape. Their outer ships shifted inward, overlapping shield coverage. Their command vessel rotated, adjusting its forward sensors toward the drone swarm. With every move, their formation compressed. The gap between vessels narrowed to a fraction of safe maneuvering range. Dekar's jaw tensed. They're condensing their profile. They think it's a second wave of manned interceptors, Torin said, voice flat. And they want a cleaner strike pattern. Dakar frowned. Or they want to neutralize us in a single sweep. They always do. To the untrained eye, the enemy's motion looked defensive, but to Toren, who'd studied Zynar assault patterns for 12 years, it was a tell. When they expected retaliation, they spread wide. When they sensed hesitation, they tightened, betting on brute acceleration. They're about to lock their targeting grid, Toren said. When they do, their shield cycle resets. Dakar tilted his head. That's the opening. Time point 4 seconds. It's enough. Below them, technicians tracked the shield fluctuation across thermal imaging layers. Xenar vessels carried adaptive defense fields that rechanneled power in sequential bursts. Between bursts, there was a dip, slight, nearly imperceptible, but mathematically present. Prometheus was designed to exploit it. Torn stepped forward and keyed a direct channel to Ravenhold. "Captain Holton," he said, "your opening's approaching." Holt's voice came through with no delay. "Drone Wave 1 is in position, final calibration ongoing, Phase 2 ready on your command. Maintain distance, let them finish compressing. They'll think we're stalling. Let them." Torn turned toward the lower gallery, where civilian liaisons sat quietly, watching the feed from public news networks. He walked down the steps, each footfall heavier than the last, and reached the nearest table. He gestured for the feed to be cast across the Northern Hemisphere's live relay network. One of the aides hesitated. "Sir, we're showing global panic. Governments are calling emergency sessions." "Then they'll want to see how this ends." The room dimmed as feed overlays shifted. Dozens of global eyes now watched what came next. High above the Pacific, the Zynar command ship released a warning flare. Crimson streak across low orbit, signaling weapon lock. Dozens of kinetic pods rotated into firing channels. The formation compressed further. Their arrogance blinded them. Inside Ravenhold, Holt walked to the launch cradle. 200 live drones remained locked under final staging clamps. His eyes scanned the last data burst. Synchronization stable. Atmospheric interference minimal. They'd tuned each warhead's release path to match the Zynar shield drop interval. He tapped a single key. The control lights changed from yellow to white. Back in Greenland, Torn straightened. "Send them," he said. Ravenhold's second launch command triggered silently. Prometheus drones moved faster than sound, beyond radar, coated in stealth polymers that scattered light and distorted gravity signature. They entered Earth's cloud cover as ghosts. No warning, no thunder, just a cold ripple through the upper sky. From civilian telescopes in New Zealand, some viewers claimed to see faint flickers, metal shadows sliding across sunrise clouds. No one could track them. Nothing answered back. Inside the war room, Dakar leaned closer. "They're committing. Formations locked." Torn's voice dropped to a whisper. "And they're dead." And above the Pacific, without a single word from Earth, the trap began to close. 11.4, that's the hole. Gren Solvak's voice cut through the analytics bay like a scalpel. No preamble, no theory, just raw data. He turned from the sensor arrays, sweat streaking down the side of his shaved scalp, pointer finger stabbing the simulation overlay, cycling on the wide tactical screen. The simulation didn't lie. A steady pulse of energy formed peaks every second, then dipped, just enough to reveal a shield instability across the Zynar fleet's forward band. It wasn't weakness. It was a recalibration artifact. Overlapping fields traded current every 11.4 seconds, cycling output to prevent thermal overload. But during the exchange window, for a moment shorter than a blink, the mesh collapsed. Torn Vask stared at the data. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He simply leaned closer and said, "Show me that timing over their flagship's core." Solvak tapped a sequence. The screen zoomed in on the largest Xenar vessel, spined along the dorsal ridge, angular fins jutting from each side in a gravity well that marked it as command class. Its energy grid flickered like a heartbeat. The drop was real. "You trust this cycle's consistent?" Torin asked. "It's not a guess. I've mapped 30 iterations. The pattern holds even during their maneuvers," Solvac said. "They're powering their shields through rotational cycling to avoid core burnout. It keeps their fleet compact, but every time they rotate, they risk exposure." "Then we time our payloads to the dip," Torin said. "They'll tighten more if we stay quiet," Solvac added. "We won't stay quiet. Not yet." Torin keyed the command deck comms. "Phase Delta. Deploy bait." Far above, inside Ravenhold, the command deck stirred. Captain Jorn Holt adjusted the tethered bracers on his sleeves as the order came through. He crossed to the drone bay rail, scanning the updated strike map on the console. Vex Morrow was already aligning targeting trajectories against the newest readings. "We got the dip cycle confirmed," Holt said. Morrow didn't look up. "Payloads can match it, but only if we stagger the wave. We'll need pre-roll compensation, exact detonation alignment to within a quarter millimeters. Rebuild the DEET timers. Give each drone a separate profile. That's going to mean full recalibration. You're flying blind for at least 60 seconds. Holt shrugged off the warning. "Won't be the first time." Below them, 10 decoy drones were moved into place. Smaller, nimbler units running signal distortion. Each drone emitted false drive heat, overloaded emission pulses, and broadcasted Earth-style targeting arrays. They weren't there to hit anything. They were bait. Marrow tapped final commands into the interface, locking the fakes into launch paths. "You think they'll bite?" "They're Xenar," Holt said. "They don't believe we can hit them. That's the mistake." With a lurch, the Ravenhold's dorsal plates hissed open. The decoy drones fired, streaking from their tubes like flecks of glass through a wind tunnel. They split in diverging spirals, cutting through cloud density and broadcasting interference codes built to mimic Earth's early defense grid. To Xenar sensors, it would look like Earth was scrambling. From orbit, the enemy's ships turned. In Greenland, Torin watched as the flagship reoriented. Its upper tower extended, like a spear elongating before a thrust. Warheads rotated into deployment tracks, red notches glowing on Earth's orbital scans. "They're shifting," Solvac said, eyes pinned to the real-time feed. "The flagship just recalibrated targeting for atmospheric angle. This isn't a test fire, they're going to commit." "They think we're trying to push them off course," Dekar said, standing beside Torin. "They want to neutralize before we regroup." "Let them," Torin replied. "The more confident they get, the closer they cluster." He crossed the room to the central console, loading updated kinetic maps of the Xenar formation. The flagship had just drawn 3 escort craft within a 100-meter radius, tight enough to create shield overlap, but narrow enough to make explosive spread lethal if one were breached. "We wait for the next dip," he said. "We launch just before it, not after." Solvac's hand froze over the datapad. "We're not waiting for the dip to finish?" "If we fire during the fall," Torin explained, "they'll start to shift before impact. But if we fire into the fall, they're locked in place by system load." Dekar exhaled through his nose. "That's a narrow window." Torin's voice was steady. "That's the difference between scorch marks and wreckage." Up above, Ravenhold's lighting shifted from operational blue to deployment white. The walls throbbed with launch readiness signals. Holt stood in silence, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the overhead schematic that showed the Xenar formation condensing tighter than before. Marrow gave him a side glance. "They're reacting hard to the bait. They want a kill," Holt said. "We'll give 'em one." Each live drone in the payload bay clicked into launch tubes. Locking clamps released one by one with sharp metallic snaps. Cooling lines hissed as containment chambers closed. Diagnostic lights blinked green across the boards. Marrow finalized the timing offsets. Each drone detonates on cycle breach. You'll have a 2-second dead zone after wave 1. Enough for retaliation if they survive. Hey, they won't. Marrow turned. You always this sure? Only when I'm right. The final deployment map fed through to Greenland. Taran watched the trajectory align with the real-time telemetry from Solvek's feed. The Xenar shield cycle was due in less than 5 seconds. He tapped the comm. Captain Holt, begin launch. Understood. Inside Ravenhold, Holt gave a single nod. Phase 2. Release the storm. From the belly of Earth's silent dagger, 170 war drones deployed in synchronized succession, each one bending around the curve of the Earth, invisible to optical scans, masked against thermal arrays. They moved in silence, guided not by guesswork, but by data refined through blood, failure, and survival. Inside each drone, antimatter capsules ticked toward detonation readiness. Each one aimed for the flagship's spine, each one timed for the fracture in their shield. And each one bore Earth's reply. The drones curved through the lower mesosphere, their frames already shedding compressed heat into the thin upper air. Joran Holt stood motionless at the helm display aboard Ravenhold, watching data tick past in tight columns. Altitude bleed, shield contact estimates, variance tolerances down to 6 decimals, all of it surged across the control wall in red bursts. Signal interference climbing, Morrow warned from the secondary console. Jammers are active. Sector 3's losing telemetry. Expected. Holt didn't shift. Keep tracking what holds. We fly the trajectory, not the signal. The Prometheus war drones, 200 total at deployment, had spread into 3 V-shaped swarms. Intermittent loss was inevitable. Xenar fleet jamming was dense and chaotic, distorting not just communications but micro-agment routines inside each drone's gyro. Within seconds of full atmospheric entry, 31 lost guidance and spun into decay. 15 detonated prematurely from forced overloads. Holt didn't react. That margin had been part of the plan from the beginning. He didn't need all of them. He needed the survivors to strike the right interval. On Ravenhold's forward scope, the flagship now occupied center grid, massive, slow-turning, and overconfident. Escort craft orbited it like chained wolves, their heat signatures synchronized for full shield coverage, but the curve of their shield cycle dip, Solvak's analysis from the Greenland bunker, lined up exactly with the incoming warpath. They hadn't seen the drones, they weren't even looking. Inside the flagship, Xenar War Captain Velkor Tyr moved through the inner chamber with one hand against the pulse rail, his gait steady beneath the low thrum vibration that pulsed through the floor. His artificial lens rotated once. He was preparing a command broadcast. Earth's silence had insulted him. A counterstrike was expected. But nothing had arrived. He never saw the first drone pierce his lower deck. In that moment, as Earth's weapons breached the atmospheric threshold above the fleet, the dip in the shield cycle aligned perfectly with Prometheus Wave 1. The impact, Drone 17 struck first, colliding with the exposed belly of the flagship at Mach 14. The antimatter containment failed instantly, discharging into the mid-deck hull. The hull didn't rupture. It vanished, annihilated in a directional plume that atomized the reactor spindle and carved a hole through the center of the ship wider than a city block. 8 more drones struck simultaneously, some catching the command tower's upper fins, others carving through the underwing of adjacent escort vessels. Each detonation was silent in space but delivered a cascade of heat and pressure that lit the debris field like a series of strobe flashes. Fire rippled where fire shouldn't exist, not because combustion had a place in vacuum, but because matter ceased to exist fast enough to produce radiant bleed. Inside Ravenhold, Holt's gaze didn't leave the screen. He saw the explosions and raw data before he saw light, power drop-off, hull separation markers, thermal overrun signatures climbing into extinction levels. The flagship's core registry went dark. Its signal ceased. Morrow's voice dropped. It's gone. All of it. Wave 1 impact success rate? 85%. Prepare Wave 2. Above Earth, escort ships banked violently, scattering out of formation as the flagship's absence created gravitational instability. Fragments of superheated wreckage drifted backward in arcs. Secondary detonations continued, not from direct hits, but from cascading reactor failures. The drones hadn't just destroyed the command ship, they'd cracked the fleet's spine. On the civilian global feeds, the event appeared seconds later. Dozens of independent broadcasters captured it, first as a flicker, then a series of bursts, then one unmistakable reality. The Zynar formation was breaking apart. The frames of 3 warships folded outward and collapsed. A 4th exploded mid-turn, sending a spiral of slag into the lower stratosphere. Inside the Greenland bunker, Torun Vask stood unmoving. A junior analyst whispered something behind him, something reverent, maybe hopeful, but Torun ignored it. He focused on the waveform collapsing across the enemy's command frequencies. The Zynar broadcast lines had gone silent, not encrypted, not rerouted. Silent. Dakar approached quietly. "They're not transmitting. They've lost central coordination," Torun said, voice low. "That was the brain. And the teeth." Torun keyed into the internal channel. "Captain Holt, confirm impact. Readiness for secondary engagement?" Holt's voice came back steady. "Targets destabilized. Drone teams 2 and 4 are in final drift phase. We're ready for wave timing." In the background of Holt's reply, static crackled briefly, some feedback from cross-satellite disruption. But it didn't interfere with his next words. "They were blind. Now they're just targets." Back in orbit, the Zynar ships flared their retrothrusters. They weren't fleeing, they were realigning, trying to consolidate new shield structures. Without a central broadcast, each ship defaulted to onboard subroutines. The fleet, once fluid, became rigid, fractured into isolated clusters. No shared defense. Holt watched the pattern fracture. For years, the Zynar had waged war through unity. That unity had now become a liability. Mero adjusted final trajectories. "Secondary drones are locked. We're at full deployment readiness." "Trigger it," Holt said. As Ravenhald's platform opened again, the final drone banks slid into position. Holt didn't blink. He simply watched the broken formation and nodded once, almost absently. "You wanted to know if I'd flinch," he said quietly to no one. "You chose the wrong planet." The second wave of drones launched, silent as before, but this time carrying no pretense of evasion. Their paths were direct, their targets were scattered. And below them, Earth watched with open eyes. The Zynar retaliated like cornered predators, blind, furious, and off balance. With their command vessel erased and swarm coherence shattered, the remaining ships began to cycle their targeting systems manually. Inside the Greenland bunker, Torun Vask watched the fragmented telemetry coming in from orbital reconnaissance. It wasn't coordinated, it was instinct. 7 warheads launched, said analyst Relorn from the Coastal Defense Board. Targets? Western U.S., seaboard, Japanese archipelago, South China coast. Trajectories stagger. Torun didn't raise his voice. Angle of descent? 31 degrees shallow. They're trying to skim under mid-atmospheric intercept range. He didn't hesitate. Get Brand Cord on the line. The display shifted to a real-time channel. Commander Brand Cord's face appeared. Sweat marked the edge of his brow, jacket half-buttoned over reinforced vest. Behind him, the Coastal Defense Station in Okinawa blazed with activity, rails moving in tight arcs as interceptor pods clicked into launch tubes. "Ready to catch your trash?" Cord said, his voice dry, steady. "You need all of them down?" "Every one." Cord's fingers blurred over his console. "Then I'm going to need orbital relays unlocked. Millisecond delay isn't an option anymore." Torun tapped the override directly into the system. "Done. You'll have point data direct from Solvac's team." Cord nodded once. "Then let's put their gods in the ocean." Across Earth's upper defense network, interceptor silos activated. From California's inland ridge, from Hokkaido's automated defense arc, and from deep-water stations in the Philippine Trench, the interceptors rose, sleek, dark cylinders slashing upward in staggered waves. Unlike the drones, these weren't engineered for stealth. They were hammers built for a single purpose: to meet descending death with acceleration and detonation. Back in orbit, Holt watched it unfold through Ravenhold's command suite. The Zynar fleet was burning fuel fast, shifting mass toward rear propulsion. They were trying to outrun Earth's upper atmospheric reach. Holt's fingers tightened around the command rail. Marrow Wave 2. Update engine targeting to rear vector systems. Ignore armor, we're taking mobility. Barrow adjusted the pathing scripts, snapping new markers onto the active grid. They're venting heat like dying reactors. Want me to patch to rail support? Negative, Holt said. We cut their engines. Rail guns will do the cleanup. 24 Prometheus drones, part of the second deployment cycle, adjusted mid-flight. They arced wide around debris fields, avoiding ship carcasses still leaking volatile material. One drone clipped a chunk of Zynar hull mid-turn and disintegrated, flash frying on contact. The rest moved with programmed accuracy, descending on retreating Zynar cruisers, like spears thrown from the Earth itself. The first drone made contact. A cruiser spun hard starboard as its aft propulsion cones flared. The drone struck at the moment of redirection, its antimatter payload cracking through outer plating and detonating inside the vessel's midline engine tract. The ship's rear third vanished in a single pulse. The forward structure twisted violently, venting bodies and consoles into upper orbit before collapsing on itself. 3 more detonations followed. Back on Earth, R'hllorn shouted from the analytics bay. We have contact intercepts. Coastal missiles have matched vectors. Karin moved toward the upper projection rail. Estimated success window? Target solutions locked. 5 seconds to impact. Over the Pacific, 7 white arcs collided with 7 crimson streaks. The first kinetic warhead split apart above the waterline, its shattered fragments punching into the ocean like burning nails. The second turned to slag 10 kilometers above Osaka. The third was missed, narrowly, before a rail pulse from the Guam orbital ring vaporized it mid-fall. Torin said nothing. His hands rested over the rail, unmoving as each confirmation came in. The final warhead over San Diego was clipped by twin interceptors at once, breaking apart in mid-air, debris scattering over open water. Civilian footage caught the moment and began circulating within minutes. All 7 were stopped. In orbit, Zynar vessels attempted emergency jump protocols, their drives pulling unstable power. Holt's targeting systems registered escalating energy buildup in 3 ships. They weren't jumping. They were trying to cook themselves beyond radar and fall out of trace range. Morrow shook his head. They're going to rupture before they make it. Let them try, Holt said. Rail battery, slot in targeting relay to command tier. We've got stragglers. At Holt's order, Ravenhold coordinated with Earth's orbital network. From the Indian Ocean station, railguns pivoted, tracking fleeing Zynar ships. The firing mechanism launched dense ferromass projectiles wrapped in electromagnetic sheaths, each one silent in space, each one moving fast enough to punch through plating like it wasn't there. The first rail shell cut through a scout vessel from nose to tail. The ship folded inward and broke apart in a slow spiral, trailing molten wreckage as it spun toward the atmosphere. A second shell tore into a cruiser's fuel bank, igniting a detonation so fierce that radiation flooded nearby sensors. Holt's carrier, drifting closer to the conflict zone, didn't go untouched. A wide fragment, once part of the Zynar flagship, spun into Ravenholt's aft shielding. The impact jarred the entire command deck. Holt staggered once before bracing against the bulkhead. Alarms flashed amber across the display. No breach, but damage was logged. Marrow read the report. Starboard stabilization fin is offline. secondary yaw thrusters compensating. Good, Holt said. Keep us between Earth and whatever's still burning. Back in Greenland, Torn stepped away from the projection wall and crossed to the inner command corridor. His destination was locked under dual authorization, Command Interceptor Deployment. A junior officer cleared the door. Dakar approached, frowning. You're going up there? They're not running, Turan replied. They're dragging the fight. You've got Holt, he can finish this. They'll clear the path, Torrance said, entering the hangar bay. I'll walk them through it. As the launch platform opened, the Arctic wind tore across the loading grid. Torn climbed into the interceptor, an older model, less automated, still armored by hand-laid plates. He fastened the straps himself, every buckle deliberate. Inside the control shell, his fingers tapped the ignition. He rose from the Earth, leaving the silence behind. The interceptor tore through the upper atmosphere with torque-jarring force, its hull groaning under the transition from Arctic ascent to orbital glide. Torin Vask gripped the left-hand control yoke, jaw set, eyes locked on the fast-dimming blip ahead. A single Xenar vessel, smaller than the others but still armed and accelerating toward deep sky. Target is slipping past the cloud ceiling, said the onboard tactical unit. Velocity increasing. Remaining fusion trace indicates emergency jump core charging. Torin responded manually, fingers darting across toggles. Overlay its exhaust geometry. I want line of sight before it breaks range. The screen split into layered telemetry. Vask's interceptor was gaining, but barely. Every shift in the stick reverberated through his arms, amplified by the stripped-down frame of the interceptor. No stabilization fins, no redundancies, just thrust, shielding, and one rail-mount drone capsule below the cockpit. Back in orbit, aboard Ravenhold, Joran Hold's eyes narrowed. The enemy ship's vector had turned erratic, cutting through the thickest stretch of wreckage still floating between upper orbit and the thermosphere. Debris from the flagship spun like broken scaffolding, some sections still smoldering. The remaining Xynar cruiser was weaving between it, throwing off targeting locks. Planes flew over the coordination grid. Torrens closing, but he won't get a clean strike without trailing shrapnel. We've got 3 seconds to triangulate. After that, the jump core fires. Holt didn't answer. He stepped forward. From his position, he could see the escapee's arc curling upward, drawing a shaky spiral through the debris curtain. It wasn't a straight run. It was desperation, speed over navigation. Move Ravenhold into the gate, Holt ordered. Marrow blinked. You want to block its trajectory? You're gambling it won't crash through us. If it hits us, that means it never jumped. That's good enough. Marrow didn't argue further. He rerouted auxiliary thrusters. The carrier jolted left, stabilizers pulsing as it slipped between 2 tumbling cruiser segments. Sparks sprayed along the hull as a dislodged Xenar antenna scraped across the viewport and spun away. Warning lights flared once, then quieted. Below, Torrin's voice crackled through a tight beam channel. It's preparing to fold. I've got exhaust flaring across rear panels. Holt responded immediately. I'm in its way. Then all heard it. The final Xynar vessel realigned its rear fins, locking into its emergency acceleration sequence. Deep in its core, fusion chambers expanded, pulling gravitational sync as it prepared to open a short-burst window beyond Earth's orbital defense range. Torn closed within 900 meters. His heads-up targeting cues flickered from green to amber, disrupted by stray thermal echoes. He pulled a switch on the right panel, activating the drone capsule. The pod detached, guided by inertia and a micro-burst of nitrogen, just above the rear drive collar. The enemy saw it coming. It twisted sharply, but not fast enough. The drone struck, not the core, but the upper stabilizer. Antimatter containment ruptured on impact. The resulting detonation didn't split the ship, it shoved it downward, altering its trajectory by 34 degrees. Its core remained intact, but its course curved straight into the upper edge of Ravenhold's defensive field. Holt stepped back from the rail. Lock final drone, manual override. Arrow didn't move. If this clips us, fire it. The drone launched without another word. This one didn't arc or spiral. It moved like a nail through glass. Straight, unrelenting, final. Contact. The antimatter warhead breached the Zynar ship's rear bank. The jump core, already overcharged, failed catastrophically. Internal collapse flooded outward, folding the entire vessel into fragments so fine they glowed blue at the edge of molecular dissociation. The wreckage caught fire as it fell, not from impact, there was no intact structure left to burn, but from the residual atmosphere the debris punched into. It descended over the Pacific in brilliant streaks, like shards of midnight glass catching sunlight. Across Earth's northern hemisphere, civilian cameras captured it from coastal rooftops, shipping freighters, military weather stations, the sky lit in narrow columns. Some thought it a meteor shower. Others knew better. Inside his interceptor, Torin leaned forward and spoke into the channel. Target neutralized. Pacific skies clear. All hostiles eliminated. No cheering followed. No broadcast anthem played. Just the finality of data delivered in a tone cold enough to carve stone. On Ravenhold, Holt stood alone in the forward bay. The debris fields now showed no active motion. No red lights pulsed, no signatures flashed. Only ash trails falling toward the ocean's skin. He reached down and clicked the transmission log to record, then walked back into shadow. The battle finished. Holt stepped off the carrier's lift deck and into the artificial gravity field of the newly operational orbital hub station Koran, named for a pilot who never made it back from the 2147 asteroid breach. The air here was sterilized but carried the scent of lubricant from still curing support beams and the ozone-free sharpness of high-altitude solar filtration. No grand banners, no commemoration fanfare, just the quiet sound of a warship unloading what was left of its crew. Across the central concourse, Torin Vask waited in front of the command hall, posture as rigid as when he stood on Earth's defense tier hours earlier. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just nodded. Holt approached with even strides, his jacket still marred with streaks from the Ravenhold's final debris run. They shook hands once. No words were exchanged until the docking clamps behind them disengaged with a mechanical snap. Post-mortem status? Holt asked. 2 of the interceptors sustained heat buckling. No casualties, Torn replied. Mars tech crew filed for hull reinforcement upgrades already approved. In Zynar? Quiet. No dispatch. No statement. Intelligence says their outer colonies have gone into diplomatic blackout. Holt processed that. Not retreat, recalculation. They thought we were hesitant. They didn't understand the difference between a silence and a setup. They moved together down the corridor, passing crews reloading supply lines and resetting station monitors. No one saluted. Every man was too busy rebuilding something. Inside the strategy hall, the command floor was already under renovation. Bulkheads replaced with armored plating, displays calibrated to new jump space threat metrics, all informed by the Zynar propulsion tech Earth had begun repurposing. Engineers moved in disciplined silence, dismantling enemy cores, cataloging layered shielding with hands that knew what had nearly ended them. A younger officer at a workbench noticed Holt's uniform. "You were on the Ravenhold, sir?" Holt nodded. The officer hesitated, then pointed to a display window where a frozen frame still cycled, a silhouette of Holt's ship, backlit by the final Zynar detonation over the Pacific. "They've been playing this image on half the civilian networks," he said. "You're the reason my brother didn't evacuate." He said, "If Earth was sending that up, it must have meant we weren't done yet." Holt didn't respond. He just glanced at the image. The wreckage behind his ship wasn't art, it was function. A reminder that Earth had built something capable of holding the line. Later that day, on Mars, Torrance stood alone before the memorial wall, a 10-meter slab of quarried basalt, matte finished and left unpolished. The names were etched deep, not for design, but to ensure permanence against dust storms and time. One line read, Corin Holt, Atmospheric Recovery Crew, 2147. He ran his fingers along the letters, remembering the sound of Coran's voice over the final radio transmission. He didn't speak then. He didn't now. Instead, he saluted, one motion, held still. The wind blew through the open gallery, grit stung his face. He didn't flinch. By the following cycle, a training battalion assembled at Earth's GDN Primary Academy. Holt stood before them in utility blacks, boots dusted, voice carrying through the open-air, tiered platform. You're not here to react, you're here to force recalculation. No one shifted. You don't ask for leniency, you make it irrelevant. One of the cadets leaned forward. What do we do when they broadcast ultimatums? Holt answered without pause. You don't reply, you remove their capacity to repeat the question. He stepped down. The cadets watched him go without a word. The lesson was not in the speech. It was in the fact that he had stood there at all. Elsewhere, Earth's global networks pulsed with edited footage, composite sequences of the Ravenhold crossing orbit, the final antimatter burst igniting over water, the fractured Zynar command ship falling like a failed god into the sea. The feed was not stylized. No special effects. Just raw angles from civilian lenses, reprocessed by journalists too stunned to dramatize. The message was already out. Zynar councils held emergency assemblies across 5 territories. 2 planetary governors stepped down within a week. One admiral was reportedly executed in internal tribunal. Their Imperium didn't send another ship. They hadn't just lost a battle, they had misread the human equation, and no empire repeated that mistake twice. Inside the station's observation deck, Holt and Torrance stood side by side, looking out toward the blue and black curve of Earth's night edge. Construction bots in the distance were rebuilding docking scaffolds. New materials, hardened struts, sharper designs informed by Zynar schematics now bent to Terran logic. Do we formalize the doctrine? Holt asked. Taran tilted his head slightly. It's already formal, they just saw it demonstrated. We didn't answer them. Think they'll come back? Not soon. But someone else will. They didn't speak for a while after that. The corridor lights dimmed to psycho mode. Below them, Earth rotated slow and silent, unaware for a moment of the storm it had just survived. And the men who had turned that storm back didn't celebrate. They simply stood watch. Because that, more than any broadcast, or image, or memorial, was what humanity had just taught the galaxy.